Everyone's been asking which era of The Walking Dead was the best. Season 1's raw intimacy, or the prison's moral complexity, or maybe the Commonwealth's ambition and scale. It's one of those debates that lives forever in comment sections. People feel strongly about it, get nostalgic about it, argue about it with real feeling. And it never quite settles, but I think we've been looking in the wrong direction entirely. Because the question isn't which era was best. The question is what the show was actually asking during its most praised stretch, what it kept returning to, season after season, like a hand reaching for something it couldn't quite hold. What gave those first 4 seasons their particular texture? The quality that people reach for when they say it felt different, without always being able to say how. There's a small detail in season 2 that most people don't pause on. Hershel Green standing in the morning light of his farm, turning a pocket watch in his hands, quietly, almost absently. The show doesn't explain it. Nobody comments. It's just there. A man from the before world, still marking time, still keeping some version of the old order alive in his hands. What if the best era wasn't defined by its quality, but by the single question it kept asking over and over until it broke your heart? I keep coming back to this, and I want to be honest that I'm not entirely sure I can prove it. But the evidence is there quietly if you know what to look for. The Walking Dead's first 4 seasons occupy a specific place in the fandom's memory. Not just as good television. Plenty of people would argue that later seasons are technically more ambitious, more cinematic, more complex in their plotting. But those first 4 seasons had something. People say this with feeling, even when they can't say what the something was. You'll find it in almost any community discussion. Seasons 1 through 4 felt different. They left a mark that the later seasons, for all their scale, didn't quite reach in the same way. I've spent a long time in the archive trying to name what that something was, going back through episodes, tracing character arcs, looking at what the show kept returning to before it moved on. And what I keep finding, episode by episode, character by character, season by season, is not a production quality or a showrunner's particular style, or even a specific beloved set of actors. It's a question. One question, asked in 100 different forms, placed at the centre of almost every major story, beat across those first 4 seasons. Can we still be good people? Not can we survive? Not can we win? Not can we rebuild civilization, or defeat the villain, or hold the walls long enough? Just that. Can we, these specific people, in this specific collapsed world, still be, in any meaningful sense, good? Can the moral identity that the before world produced survive in a world that seems designed to punish it? Is goodness something you carry with you, or is it something the world has to make room for? That question is what I want to follow tonight, because once you see it, it's everywhere in those early seasons. It's in the architecture of the episodes, in what the conflicts are actually about underneath their surface tensions, in what people say when they're trying to explain themselves to each other in the quiet between crises. It's in Hershel and the barn. It's in Rick and Shane, circling each other for 2 seasons. It's in every person we meet in the first 4 years of the story, at the moment when the apocalypse is asking them who they are now that the structures that shaped them are gone. And it's what I think the show gradually had to stop asking. Not through a single decision, not through anyone's failure. But the question has requirements. It needs room. It needs stillness. It needs a story willing to slow down around the moments of moral weight, rather than moving past them. And long-running television, building toward franchise scale, can't always give a question that much space. There's a man I want to start with. You've met him already in The Hook. He's standing in Season 2's light, turning a pocket watch over in his hands, and the watch matters more than it first appears. But before we get to Hershel and the watch properly, we need to go back to the beginning, to the question in its first, purest, most undisguised form, to Season 1, and to a rooftop in Atlanta, and to a man who chose to give back some guns when every tactical argument in the world said not to. What made those early seasons feel different to you? The stakes or something quieter? I keep coming back to that question because I think the answer people give reveals what they were watching for. Whatever it was, I think it was the same thing. I think it was always the question. The watch in those early Season 2 episodes sits in Hershel's pocket, unremarked, a detail in the background of a farm where the question is about to be tested more thoroughly than anywhere else in the story's first 4 years. File it away. We'll need it. There's something in Season 1, Episode 4, that I think is the question in its purest, most undisguised form. The moment before the show starts complicating it. Before survival pressure and accumulated loss make the asking harder. The episode is called Vatos. Rick's group has retrieved a bag of guns from an Atlanta rooftop and become entangled with another survivor group, led by a man named Guillermo, operating out of what appears at first to be a hostile stronghold in the city. The confrontation builds toward violence with the particular logic of two groups who don't trust each other and each have reason to believe the other is a threat. Shane, watching from a distance, has already run the numbers. These people have resources and they've demonstrated aggression. The math of the situation presented in purely tactical terms points toward force. Rick chooses to give back the guns. Not all of them. He negotiates, keeps some back, doesn't walk into the situation naive, but the fundamental choice, to engage as if these people might be worth engaging with, to extend something across the gap rather than simply taking what the group needs and leaving, is an active, costly choice. The cameras pull back to reveal what's behind Guillermo's locked doors. A care home, staffed by workers who stayed when everyone else ran, caring for elderly residents who couldn't be moved. Guillermo and his group are protecting something fragile, and they became dangerous because the world stopped valuing fragility and they had to become dangerous to protect it. When Rick sees this, when the context arrives, you can watch the understanding cross his face. The choice he made, the extension of trust, was correct. Not because it was safe, not because it was tactically optimal, because the assumption underneath it was true. These people were worth treating like people. That is the question. In its Season 1 form. Moral goodness not as a default setting, not as the path of least resistance, but as an active and costly choice made against available evidence, against the pressure of someone who keeps providing that evidence and asking why you're not adjusting to it. Shane Walsh is the pressure in Season 1. And I want to be careful here because Shane deserves more than the villain reading. Shane is not wrong about the facts. The world is as dangerous as he says it is. People are as unpredictable as he keeps insisting. The old rules have stopped applying in the specific ways he keeps trying to make Rick understand. His tactical assessments throughout Season 1 and Season 2 are consistently accurate. He's right about what the world has become, and Rick keeps choosing not to reorganize himself around those facts in the way Shane wants him to. Not out of ignorance. Rick hears Shane, argues with him, can't dismiss the evidence. He just keeps choosing not to let the evidence be the only thing that matters. He keeps choosing to hold the question open when Shane is certain it's been answered. What Rick doesn't say, in those conversations that run across Season 1 and into Season 2, the argument they keep having in different rooms and different circumstances, is as significant as anything he says out loud He doesn't concede. He doesn't admit that Shane's framework is the right one. He holds something back, some version of the belief that the question is still open, that the world hasn't finished answering it, that the answer being yes is still possible, even if the evidence keeps pushing the other way. Every Season 1 character is in the process of answering the question for themselves, and the show gives them time to do it. Andrea is choosing it consciously, with cost. Daryl is resisting it, approaching it sideways, not yet ready to name what he's actually doing when he keeps showing up for the people around him. Glenn is living it without requiring an articulation. He just is the answer in most of what he does, and the show knows this and holds him close. Dale carries it as something close to faith. Morgan, in the one episode we get with him in Season 1, carries it as grief. In Season 1, the moral world still felt like it could hold, not because the show was naive about danger, but because it was treating the question as genuinely open, as something worth asking, as something that might still resolve in the direction of yes. Did you believe it, watching Season 1 for the first time? I wanted to. I think most people did. And what the show understood, what made the best era feel the way it did, was that wanting to believe was the whole point. Season 2 is the show's longest and most deliberate season, and I want to say something that might be unpopular before I say everything else. I think it's the most important. Not the most exciting, not the most dramatically efficient, not the season that produced the most iconic individual scenes. The most important. Because Season 2 doesn't just ask the question, it builds an entire world around the slow, uncomfortable process of asking it, and trusts the audience to stay with that process even when it's frustrating. Hershel's farm is, structurally, a philosophical holding pattern. That is not a criticism. The farm exists within the story's logic as a place specifically designed to allow the question to be asked at length, in depth, without the kind of immediate tactical pressure that usually forecloses moral reflection in this world. There is food, there is shelter, there is a man who has built his life around a specific answer to the question, and there are walls, metaphorical first, eventually literal, between the people inside and the world that would resolve the question by force if given the chance. Hershel carries the pocket watch here. Through the whole season, in those quiet moments between crises, you catch him with it, checking it, turning it over in his hands, the gesture of a man who still believes that time is organised into something meaningful, that the day has a shape, that there are hours and meals and tasks, and that the watch is the keeper of the shape. This is not sentimentality. This is not a man who doesn't understand that the before world is gone. Hershel understands it perfectly. What the watch represents is his refusal to let the ending of that world be the last word on what time is for. The before world had values worth keeping time by. He intends to keep them. The walkers in the barn are the question made physical. Hershel's first wife is in there. Neighbours. People from the community around the farm. Taken by whatever happened, kept rather than put down because Hershel cannot bring himself to make the decision that putting them down requires. Not because he doesn't understand the situation. He's a veterinarian, a practical man. He knows what he's looking at. Because the decision would require him to answer the question in a direction he's not willing to answer it. How you treat the lost says something about who you are. He is not willing to be the person who treats them as waste. Shane opens the barn. Sophia walks out last, and the scene breaks something in the show and the audience simultaneously. Not because the violence is the worst the show has done, but because of what it costs everyone watching to see what was in there. Hershel's position was wrong about what could be saved. Shane's position was right about the tactical facts. And both of those things are true, simultaneously. and the show refuses to let you take comfort in either one. Could Hershel's approach have worked in a different world? I don't think the show knows. I think that not knowing is the point. The question isn't supposed to arrive at a clean answer. If it resolved cleanly, if the barn opened and the answer was obviously yes, goodness survives, or obviously no, that was naive. The best era would be a different kind of story. A lesson rather than an interrogation. From Shane's perspective, and this is the reframe that shifts the whole season slightly, the farm is a tragedy of communication. He sees the danger. He sees what's coming. He loves the people around him with something genuine and real, whatever the show later does with his arc. And the people he loves keep choosing a framework he cannot enter, based on values he's decided the world has already invalidated. His tragedy is not that he's cruel. His tragedy is that he's right about the tactical situation and wrong about what that rightness means, and he never quite hears the question clearly enough to understand why being right isn't the same thing as being correct. The watch keeps ticking on the farm. The question keeps being asked. Outside, the world waits. Patient, indifferent, already having decided. And at the centre of it all, a man who still believes time is worth marking. Still winding the watch. Still choosing to inhabit a world that measures things by values, not just outcomes. That's what Season 2 is about. And it's the foundation of everything the best era builds on top of it. Before we move into the prison, and what the question becomes there, I want to spend some real time with Hershel Green as a person. Not as a symbol, not as a plot function, but as the specific human being the show built across Seasons 2 through 4. Because I think understanding what he was carrying and how he carried it is the key to understanding what the best era was really doing. Hershel Green loses almost everything in the barn scene. Not just his belief about the walkers. His entire framework for how the world works and what it's worth and what can be redeemed. He loses it in an afternoon, in a field, while the people he was trying to protect watch. And then he does something the show treats as quietly extraordinary. He rebuilds, not by abandoning the question, by going deeper into it, by choosing to keep asking not from the protected position of a man whose framework hasn't been tested yet, but from the full awareness of a man who has paid the cost of his answer and is still choosing it. The watch passes to Glenn in Season 4. I want to be careful about the staging here because the show handles it with the quietness the moment deserves. It is not a formal ceremony, not underscored with a speech about legacy or passing torches. It's a quiet act between two people who understand what it means, in a world where most things have been stripped of the meaning they used to carry. Hershel gives Glenn the watch because Glenn is the answer walking around. Glenn Rhee has been choosing goodness since Season 1, returning for people who might not deserve it, building connection across every circumstance the world puts in front of him, finding Maggie and choosing her and building a life inside the apocalypse with the specific fullness of someone who has decided this is real and it matters. Glenn is not performing goodness. He is simply, day after day, the thing the question is asking about. Hershel's arc from Season 2's barn to Season 4's prison courtyard is the show's most careful portrait of what the question costs when you commit to it over time. He is not a young man. He doesn't have the elasticity of someone still becoming. He has deep grooves of belief and habit, and a specific understanding of what life is for, and he has to revise those grooves without abandoning them. And he does it, visibly, across 2 seasons of the story. He becomes the prison's most essential person, not because he's the most physically capable or the most tactically skilled, but because he is the person most committed to answering the question seriously, every day, in the conditions the world actually presents. In Season 4's early episodes during the flu outbreak, Hershel walks into the prison's sick ward knowing he may not come out. This is not bravery in the action hero sense. It's not even strictly sacrifice in the dramatic sense. It's a man who has decided that the question requires this of him, that the only honest answer to can we still be good in this specific moment is to walk through the door and try to keep dying people alive. The gesture is the argument. He doesn't have to give a speech. He just goes in. Who carries Hershel's role in the later seasons? I want to ask you this directly because I think the answer reveals something about what you were watching for. My honest answer from the archive: nobody fully does. Carol carries the interiority of the question, the private, daily, costly negotiation with it. Morgan carries the philosophical commitment across his breakdown and recovery arc. Maggie carries the grief of the answer's most embodied representative, but the sustained, present, publicly held, daily chosen embodiment that Hershel maintained, the role of the person who asks the question out loud, with their whole life, in front of everyone, seems to leave with him. And the watch is on Glenn's wrist now, moving forward, into the prison and everything that comes with it. Which brings us to the most ambitious thing, the best era attempted. Not just asking the question, but trying to build the answer at institutional scale. Trying to make yes into a structure that could hold. The prison community in seasons 3 and 4 is the show's most ambitious attempt to answer the question in structural rather than individual terms. Not just one person choosing goodness, not just a small group sustaining it through force of will, but a genuine attempt to build something organised around the answer, yes. A community that takes the question seriously enough to try to make it into a system. What Rick's group builds inside the prison across those 2 seasons is, for a post-apocalyptic television drama, remarkably detailed in its ordinariness. A council, Carol, Daryl, Glenn, Sasha, Hershel, that makes decisions collectively rather than by whoever has the most authority or the most weapons. Woodbury survivors integrated into the community, which is itself a significant choice. These are people who lived under the governor, who participated in or at least witnessed a system built on the answer no, and the prison community decides to bring them inside rather than exclude them. Medicine grown in a small garden patch. A school for the children, run with the specific seriousness of people who believe the children's futures are real. A library assembled from whatever books survived. Glenn wears the watch through all of this. You see it in season 4's early episodes. The small everyday presence of something that carries what Hershel carried. On the wrist of a man who has built a life here. Glenn and Maggie are, in these episodes, the most fully realised version of what the question's answer looks like in practice. People who have decided that love and connection and the mundane work of building a shared life are not naive in the face of the apocalypse. They are the point. They are what all of it is for. The watch is not a memory of Hershel. It's a daily practice of the thing Hershel embodied. The council scenes in season 4 are some of the most underrated sequences the show produced. 5 people with radically different histories and instincts and answers to the question. Carol, who has already done things the council doesn't fully know about. Daryl, who came from a life that gave him every reason not to believe in collective governance. Glenn, who just is the answer. Hershel, who guards it. Michonne, who arrived at it from the outside through grief and time. Sitting together and working through decisions that don't have clean right answers. The process is the argument. The act of people trying to govern themselves together, to distribute authority and accountability rather than concentrating it. to arrive at decisions through something resembling mutual respect. That is the answer, demonstrated not in a speech but in a room. The prison doesn't die because the answer was wrong. I think this is the most important thing about the prison arc, and the thing most worth sitting with. The governor attacks from outside. He brings force. He brings a specific kind of violence that the question's answer has no internal mechanism to stop. Not because the answer is naive about violence, but because the answer is about what you build, and what he brings is the determination to destroy what others build, because its existence is an argument he doesn't want to hear. Hershel dies on his knees in front of the prison gate, while Michonne is inside, and Rick is trying to negotiate, and Carl is watching from a distance he cannot cross. The show stages this with the specific economy of an event it knows is irreversible and doesn't need to underline. The watch passes on, to wherever Glenn goes with it, into whatever comes next. The question's most committed and visible guardian is gone. The question continues without him. Do you think the prison could have survived without the governor? Could the experiment have run long enough to produce a definitive answer? The show makes this permanently unknowable, and I think that's the right choice. The governor arrives before the prison is finished, before the community has fully formed, before the experiment has run its full course. We never find out what the complete answer would have looked like. The question gets interrupted rather than answered, and that interruption, a force from outside imposing its answer before the inside answer could fully form, might be the single most important structural fact about the best era. Season 4's second half consists of 8 episodes, from After through A, that I think are among the most formally interesting the show produced, and which tend to receive less attention than they deserve because they sit between the prison's dramatic fall and the Season 5 premiere's cathartic momentum. After the prison falls, the group scatters across Georgia in the dead of winter. They have nothing. In most cases, they have 1 or 2 other people, sometimes a close companion, sometimes a stranger, sometimes a child, and the road and whatever it sends toward them. The season's second half is structured as a series of parallel stories, each following a small cluster of survivors through the same landscape toward Terminus, each telling a private version of the question in the most stripped-down conditions yet. Glenn carries the watch through all of this. He's sick, recovering from the prison flu, physically weakened, separated from Maggie, attaching himself to Tara, and then to Abraham and Eugene and Rosita, and their fabricated mission to Washington. He follows a lie he knows might be a lie because the alternative is lying down. The watch is on his wrist. The question is still being asked in the worst conditions the show has put it in yet. No community to hold it, no council to practice it, just a man and a road and the accumulated weight of everything the watch represents. Daryl and Beth are the most explicit version of the question in these episodes. 2 people who have never found a common language, forced into proximity, working through what they still believe in a world that keeps providing evidence they shouldn't believe any of it. The episode in the Moonshine Distillery is the best single-chapter version of the question in the entire best era. Daryl's resistance, his grief, his eventual breakdown outside while Beth tries to keep the light on. What Daryl doesn't say in that scene, sitting in the burning house, watching something go up, is what the question costs when you've been carrying it without acknowledgement for years. The silence is the grief. The symbol is the fire. The gesture is Daryl, arms crossed, facing away from it. Rick and Carl in the suburban house are another version. A father narrating a future to a son, old enough to see through the narration, both of them choosing to keep the question alive when the immediate world offers no material support for doing so. The dog food episode, the Michonne episode, the slow restoration of the relationship. All of it is the question being asked in the most intimate possible register. Can this specific father and this specific son still be good to each other in conditions that were designed to make that impossible? And then there's Terminus. And this is where the best era provides its most important mirror for itself. Terminus, as we learn in Season 5, once answered the question the same way Rick's group answers it. They built something open, a beacon, a genuine welcome. They put up signs and left the door open and believed, the way the farm believed, the way the prison believed, that the answer was yes. And they were destroyed for it, systematically, brutally, by people who had decided the question's answer was no and were willing to enforce that answer with violence against anyone who kept saying yes. The people who built Terminus rebuilt, after what was done to them, into something the season opens on, a community organised around the consumption of other people. The monstrous answer arrived at through genuine suffering and a world that confirmed every possible fear. They're not wrong about what happened to them. They experienced the cost of yes at its most catastrophic. The horror of Terminus isn't the violence. It's the recognition that these are people who asked the same question we've been following for 4 seasons and answered it from experience, not ignorance. Which Season 4B arc answered the question most honestly? I keep returning to Daryl and Beth in that bar, and to the house burning behind them, and to Beth's quiet insistence that she didn't cry while Daryl couldn't stop. The most honest answer to the question in those episodes might be, I don't know. I'm going to keep asking anyway. And sometimes keeping the question alive looks like standing outside a burning house in the dark because that's the only thing you have left to do. There is something in the Season 5 premiere, No Sanctuary, the episode that resolves Terminus, that functions as a kind of turning point in the show's relationship to its central question. Not a dramatic announcement of change, something quieter, a shift in rhythm that takes a few episodes to fully register. Rick and the group escape Terminus through Carol's explosions, through chaos and fire, and the operational capability of people who have learned what surviving requires. The escape is efficient. The decisions made inside it are rapid, consequential, and largely unreflected upon in the moment. Characters do what the situation requires, and the story moves at the pace those requirements demand. The moral reflection that would have surrounded a similar event in Season 2, the debate, the aftermath, the characters sitting with what they chose and what it cost, has been compressed or displaced to later episodes, or absorbed into character behaviour, rather than explicit examination. Glenn still has the watch, it's there in Season 5. But the show has stopped drawing our attention to it, the way it drew our attention to Hershel carrying it on the farm, or to the quiet moment of transfer between Hershel and Glenn. It's part of Glenn's wardrobe now, part of who he is, carried forward. The question is still with him, embodied in the thing on his wrist. But the story has started moving at a pace that doesn't quite slow down to notice it anymore. The structural shift from Season 5 onward is gradual, and, I want to be careful to say, not a failure of the show. It's a choice. A set of choices accumulating about what the story needs to be as it scales. The question, can we still be good people, has specific requirements for being asked well. It needs the story to slow down around morally significant moments. It needs characters to feel the weight of choices before and after making them. It needs the Hershel version of storytelling. Scenes in which a man sits in a barn and explains why he believes what he believes, slowly, while another man argues with him, and the show gives both of them time. Long-running franchise television can't always give a question that much space. Not because the writers don't care about it, but because a story that has committed to momentum, to escalation, to the larger architecture of a multi-season war and its aftermath needs to keep moving. And the question, can we still be good, is a question that requires stillness to be heard properly. What replaces it from season 5 onward is a related but different question. Given that goodness is possible, how do we build something that survives? That's a worthy question. It generates valid drama. The Alexandria Arc, the Saviour War, the Commonwealth. All of these are serious attempts to explore what sustainable human community looks like in the aftermath of catastrophe. And the show does thoughtful work with them. But the texture of the asking's different. The question moves faster. It answers itself more readily. It doesn't require the show to stop and sit with an unanswerable thing for a season and a half. Do you think the show made the right call? I find this question genuinely difficult, which is maybe why I keep returning to it. Part of me thinks yes. The best era's question had been explored as thoroughly as a television drama could explore it, and staying would have become repetitive. Part of me thinks something was lost that the later seasons never fully recovered. The best era feeling isn't about outcomes, it's about the texture of the asking, the sense that the story genuinely didn't know the answer and was showing you that not knowing, sitting inside it, refusing to resolve it into a lesson or a victory. The question stops being asked at the structural level sometime between season 4 and season 5. The watch is still on Glenn's wrist. The question is still alive in him. But the story around him has started asking something else. Which brings us to what filled the space. The Negan arc asks a different question. I want to name this precisely, because precision matters for understanding what the best era was doing and what changed when it ended. Seasons 1 through 4 organise themselves around, can we still be good people? Seasons 6 through 8, the build-up to Negan, his introduction, the war that follows, organise themselves around, who has the power? These are not unrelated questions. The show's doing something genuinely thoughtful in connecting them. Negan's argument, the thing his system is built on, is in part that asking about goodness is a luxury of people who haven't yet encountered someone willing to simply take what they need. His whole architecture says, the question you're asking is the wrong question. Power is the organising principle. Goodness is what naive communities discuss before they meet someone like me. Glenn dies in the season 7 premiere with the watch on his wrist. The show doesn't foreground this detail the way it foregrounded every previous moment of the watch's presence. It doesn't slow down to acknowledge what's being lost alongside Glenn himself. The staging's pure devastation. The bat, the aftermath, Maggie's face. Glenn Rhee, who was the answer walking around for 7 seasons, silenced by a man who thinks the question is a category error. The watch goes wherever Glenn goes. The question's most embodied carrier is gone. Where does the watch go after this? This is something the archive doesn't fully resolve, and I want to be honest about that rather than paper over it. Maggie survives. What Maggie carries forward from Glenn's death, in the Hilltop seasons, in season 11, in Dead Cities, New York, is the most direct continuation of the question in the story's post-best era stretch. Whether she has the watch, whether it appears again in the show's visual language, is something I can't confirm with certainty. What I can say is that Maggie's arc is consistently organised around the question in a way that few other characters' arcs are in the later seasons. She keeps asking it, keeps paying the cost of the answer, keeps trying to build something that justifies what she lost. Now compare 2 moments across the show's run. Rick's Vartos decision in season 1, where he returns the guns to Guillermo's group based on the assumption that they might be worth trusting, and Rick's Terminus decision in season 5, where the group's escape involves no equivalent moment of moral extension. Same character, same core identity, radically different architecture around the choice. In Season 1, the choice takes time. Time to build toward, time to make, time to discover whether it was right. In Season 5, the situation moves faster than reflection, and the characters move with it. Both choices are defensible, but the story treats them very differently, and the difference is what I'm pointing to. 2 readings of the Negan arc, held open without deciding. The show matured past the first question into harder territory. The question, can we still be good, was the entry point, the thing that made the story emotionally accessible to the widest possible audience. Moving past it into the territory of power and survival and war was the story's necessary development. The next chapter required by everything the first question had established. The later seasons are not worse. They're doing something different that the best era's question made possible. Or, the thing that made The Walking Dead singular was exactly its willingness to keep asking an unanswerable question with patience and seriousness. That's rarer in television than good plotting or impressive scale. Moving past it was losing the specific quality that set the show apart. Not its production value, not its action sequences, not its world building, but its willingness to slow down around moral weight. The Negan arc is a good television story, but it's a kind of good television story you can find in other places. The best era's question was harder to find. Is Negan a better villain than the governor? I think about this a lot, and I keep landing on the governor is the better villain for the question the best era was asking. He's the question's antagonist, a man who answered it wrong and built a kingdom around the wrong answer, whose conflict with Rick is a conflict about which answer to the question the world will allow to survive. Negan is a challenge to whether the framework of the question should apply at all. Both are interesting. They're different kinds of interesting. Glenn's death doesn't get to say anything. That's the silence. The watch, wherever it went, still ticking. Here's what I think the archive is showing, stated as clearly as I can manage while being honest, that it's a theory rather than a confirmed intent of the show's writers. The best era of The Walking Dead, seasons 1 through 4, and specifically the Hershel arc running through its centre, was defined not by production quality or dramatic structure, or the specific beloved characters who inhabited it. It was defined by the show's willingness to sit inside an unanswerable question and refuse to resolve it. To keep asking, season after season, can we still be good people? And to mean it. To not already know the answer. To let the question cost the characters something, and cost the audience something, and cost the story something, in the form of momentum and resolution, and the comfortable sense that the drama is building toward a verdict. Can we still be good people? The show asked this in season 1, and spent 3 more seasons deepening it, refusing to let it arrive. Hershel's farm is the question in its most idealistic form. A man who has built a life around the answer yes, and is about to find out what the world does to that life. The prison is the question taken seriously enough to try to institutionalize a community organized around the answer, imperfect and real, and genuinely trying. Season 4B is the question in its most private and stripped form. Can you still be good when there's no community holding you to a standard, when it's just you and the road and whatever you still believe? And Hershel's death is the question's most committed advocate, removed from the story, at the exact moment when the story can no longer sustain both the question and the narrative momentum it's building toward a larger war. Not a decision to stop asking, a structural consequence. The story that needed to grow toward the all-out war required things that the question, asked at full depth, would have slowed down past the point of sustainability, the moment the franchise needed an answer. Needed to know whether you could still be good. Needed to move from the asking to the building to the fighting. It moved on. And that is when something changed. What it might mean for everything that came after. Not that the later seasons are wrong, but that they're haunted. Every spin-off, every subsequent season keeps reaching back toward the texture of the best era. The feeling people describe when they say those first 4 seasons were different. The thing they're reaching for is the question. Asked with the patience and seriousness the best era maintained, Negan's arc in Dead City reaches for it. Daryl in France reaches for it. The Commonwealth arc reaches for something like it in the final seasons of the original show. Whether you think the shift was necessary or costly probably says something about what you came to the show for. If you came for the drama, the action, the world building, and character dynamics and survival tension, the later seasons give you more of those things at greater scale. If you came for the question, if what the best era gave you is the specific feeling of a story genuinely uncertain about its own moral centre, asking the hardest question it knew how to ask without knowing the answer, then the shift is a real loss, not a development. Do you think the show knew it was losing the question? Or did it happen the way most losses happen, gradually without a decision, until one day you reach for something and find it's been gone for a while? I don't know. I can't know. The archive gives me the pattern, but not the intent, and the intent may not be the most important thing anyway. The pattern is real. The question was there. It left. The governor's perspective, held briefly, a man who answered the question wrong and built a season of drama around the consequences of the wrong answer. From his side, the question was never worth asking. The prison was naive. Rick's offer of coexistence was weakness. He had his answer, arrived at through his own grief, and he was going to impose it. The tragedy is not that he's evil, but that his answer, built from genuine loss, was what arrived at the prison gate before the experiment was finished. The question didn't get to answer itself. It got interrupted. The spin-offs are each, in their own ways, reaching back toward the question. I want to be careful and fair here, because I'm working partly from what I've seen, and partly from how the franchise's pattern reads when you trace it across the archive. Fear the Walking Dead began as the most direct attempt to revisit the question in a new context and with new characters. To ask what it looks like to face the moral collapse of the apocalypse from the beginning, before the group has developed the hard competence that the original show's characters built across seasons. Madison Clark's arc in the early seasons is the question applied to a family system. Can these people, who love each other in complicated and damaged and sometimes genuinely dysfunctional ways, still be good in a world that's ending? The show struggled across its run to sustain this framing with the structural consistency the original show maintained. The community widely discusses whether the later seasons found their footing or lost the thread entirely. And both readings are honest to different parts of what the show was attempting. Dead City is the spin-off I find most interesting in this specific context. Negan Smith in Manhattan is a man who answered the question wrong, comprehensively, publicly, fatally for many people, and has been living in the wreckage of that answer ever since. What Dead City asks through his arc is whether a person who answered no can work their way back toward a different answer. Not redemption in the clean television sense. Not a dramatic transformation that resolves the moral ledger. Something more complicated and more honest. The question asked again by someone who knows the full cost of the wrong answer and is genuinely uncertain whether a better one is still available to him. Maggie's presence in those episodes, her grief, her distrust, her specific refusal to simplify Negan into either monster or redeemed figure, is the question's direct continuation. She's the keeper of what Glenn was. Daryl Dixon in France is something else again. Daryl has always been one of the show's most private carriers of the question. He doesn't articulate it, doesn't perform it, just lives it in the choices he keeps making against his apparent self-interest, against the life that would be easier if he cared less. In France, among people who don't know his history, in a landscape that carries none of the original story's geographic memory, the question gets asked in conditions that are genuinely new. Can you be good in a place that doesn't know what you've done? Can the answer travel this far from its origin and still mean the same thing? What the spin-offs share, the pattern the archive keeps surfacing, is the reaching. They know what the best era had. They're trying different roads back to it. Not always successfully, not always with the structural commitment the original show maintained in its best seasons, but the attempt is genuine, and the question keeps reappearing in the spaces where the spin-offs slow down enough to ask it. Does anything in the spin-offs carry what Hershel's watch carried? The physical presence of the question, worn on someone's body, turned over in quiet moments, passed between people who understand what it means. Maggie's grief carries the weight without the object. Negan's arc carries the absence of the watch. The story of a man who broke the thing the watch represented and is reckoning with that breaking. Daryl in France carries something equivalent in his own register, the choices he doesn't have to make, made anyway, without explanation. Do you think any spin-off has recovered the feeling of the best era, even for an episode, even for a scene? I'd genuinely love to know which moments you'd point to. The question is still out there in the franchise, moving between shows, carried by different people in different forms. In Negan's silence when he's asked to account for himself. In Maggie's face when she looks at him. In Daryl doing the harder thing when nobody required him to. The watch is somewhere in all of that. The question travels with it, even when the show has stopped drawing our attention to either. Here's the pattern the archive keeps surfacing, and I want to name it carefully because it sits right at the edge of what I can claim with confidence versus what I'm theorising. The characters most committed to the question, the ones who carried it most visibly, who organised their arcs around the answer yes, who kept asking even when the world kept answering differently, are systematically removed from the story across the best era and the seasons immediately following it. And the removals happen at moments that feel, in retrospect, structurally significant. Dale Horvath dies in Season 2's Judge, Jury, Executioner. An episode whose title names the very thing Dale is arguing against. The group is deliberating about executing Randall, a captive of uncertain intent, and Dale spends the episode making the case that how they handle this decision says something about who they are. He goes around the camp, one by one, asking people to consider. He argues with Shane, he argues with Daryl. He makes the full case for the question being taken seriously. He fails to persuade. And then that same night, a walker he didn't hear coming finds him in a field. His death follows his failure, and the show marks this connection, not as punishment, but as consequence. The world didn't wait for Dale's argument to land. Beth Green's arc in Season 4B is the question in its most delicate form. Hope as a practice, maintained not because the evidence supports it, but because the alternative is worse. Her arc at Grady Memorial Hospital in Season 5 is the question applied to an institution built on exploitation. Can you still be good inside a system that isn't? Her death at the end of the Season 5 mid-season finale is the answer the show gives. Not cleanly, not through resolution, but through an act of defiance that the situation couldn't contain. Morgan Jones doesn't die, but his arc involves a different kind of removal. The question breaks him. His commitment to all life is precious, sustained across his Season 3 appearance and his Season 6 return, eventually collapses under the weight of what the world keeps doing to it. Morgan's breakdown is the story of a man who took the question seriously enough to let it destroy his capacity to function, who had to find a way back from the question rather than through it. I want to be careful not to overstate the pattern. Long-running shows lose beloved characters for many reasons. Actor availability, narrative momentum, the simple logic of a story that needs to raise stakes by removing the people the audience loves. The losses don't have to be designed, but the specific clustering around the question's most committed carriers is worth sitting with, worth asking about, worth holding as a possible reading, even if it can't be confirmed. Is it possible to tell a long-running survival story without eventually abandoning the moral question at its heart? My honest answer, from the archive, probably not in the form the best era maintained it. The question, can we still be good, is emotionally expensive in a specific way. It costs the characters who ask it something every episode, costs the audience something every episode, costs the story momentum. A question that requires stillness to be heard properly cannot survive indefinitely in a story that has committed to forward motion and escalating scale. What Hershel would say about where the show went. That's the silence I keep reaching for in this chapter. Not recrimination. He's not a recriminating man. The archive doesn't support that reading of him. Something quieter. The question, asked one more time. His voice in a room that no longer has him in it, still unanswered, still worth the asking. The watch is somewhere in what comes after, carried by someone who understood what Hershel understood, in conditions he couldn't have imagined, still keeping time. Here's the alternative reading, and I want to give it the full space it deserves, because I think it might be equally true to the first one. And the tension between them might be the most honest place the theory can end up. Maybe the question never stopped being asked. Maybe it moved inward. Carol Pelletier is the character the archive keeps returning me to when I think about this alternative. Carol, across all seasons of the original show, is a private, ongoing, costly negotiation with the question. One that doesn't require the story to slow down around her the way it slowed down around Hershel, because Carol's version of the asking has always been interior. She doesn't make speeches, she doesn't argue the point in councils or around campfires. She asks it alone, in the margins, in the spaces between the things she does for the people she loves. Her rosary appears across the seasons in the same way Hershel's watch appeared. A physical object, carried, present in quiet moments. A marker of something she's still in relation to, even when she can't name what. It's not the same motif, but it's doing adjacent work. The question worn on the body of someone who hasn't stopped asking it, even when the show's structure has moved on to asking something else. Morgan's painted walls in Season 3's Clear. That single devastating episode. Rick finding him barricaded in his hometown. Clear written everywhere. Are the question at its most exposed and most broken. A man who kept asking until the asking broke him. Who built a visual record of the cost of refusing to stop. Morgan doesn't abandon the question in that episode. He's drowning in it. The walls aren't a rejection of, can we still be good? They're the answer of a man who kept saying yes until yes became impossible to inhabit. Both readings deserve to be held. Reading one. The question was lost at the structural level when the story moved past Season 4, and that loss defined the era we call the best era by contrast. The private continuations in Carol, Morgan, Maggie and others are genuine but not sufficient. They carry the question without the architecture that made it the show's organising principle. The best era ended not with a death or a dramatic event, but with the story choosing a different question, and the private versions that survive the transition are echoes rather than the thing itself. Reading 2. The question survived, and the show trusted the audience to find it. The structural shift was evolution rather than abandonment. The question went underground, became private, became the thing that distinguishes certain characters from others, rather than the theme that organises everyone simultaneously. Carol asking it alone in a house, Morgan painting it on walls, Maggie carrying it in her grief for Glenn, Daryl living it without ever naming it. The best era didn't end. It contracted into the people who kept choosing to carry the question, quietly without the show slowing down to notice. I genuinely can't decide which reading I believe more, and I think that uncertainty is the honest place to be. The show is large and long, and has been made by hundreds of people over many years, and what it means is not a single thing that can be confirmed by checking the archive carefully enough. It's a question, appropriately, that the viewer gets to answer. Do you think Carol is still asking the question? And if she is, what do you think her current answer is? I keep thinking her answer is something like, I don't know. I haven't stopped trying to find out. Even now, even after everything, the trying is the answer, which might be the most honest answer the show ever found to can we still be good people? Not yes, not no. Still asking. We're back where we started. The farm, the morning light. Hershel Green standing in a season 2 episode, turning a pocket watch over in his hands, quietly without comment, in the background of a show that was asking the biggest question it knew how to ask. The watch has travelled, from Hershel's pocket to Glenn's wrist, a pinate markinam nam, passed in a quiet moment, without ceremony, from the man who guarded the question to the man who embodied the answer. Across the prison and Season 4B, and through the Season 7 premiere, and into wherever Maggie carries what Glenn left her. Somewhere in the franchise's ongoing present, in Manhattan or France or wherever the story goes next. The question the watch carried is still moving, in different people, in different forms. In the spaces between episodes where characters make choices, the show doesn't always stop to examine what the best era was, underneath the production quality and the beloved characters and the dramatic events that people remember most clearly. Was a story willing to live inside an unanswerable question for 4 years without blinking? Can we still be good people? The show sat with that. It didn't resolve it into a lesson or a victory or a defeat. It didn't decide which side won. It just kept asking, and kept showing you what the asking cost, and kept refusing to let the world outside the story's frame decide the answer for the characters inside it. The moment the franchise needed to move, needed to grow toward the all-out war, toward the Commonwealth, toward the scale that a multi-spin-off franchise requires, the question had to change. Not because anyone decided to abandon it, because a question that needs stillness to be heard properly cannot survive indefinitely in a story committed to forward motion. The question, can we still be good? And the story, can we keep building things that survive, are related but different. And the second one runs faster. Every spin-off reaches back. That's the pattern. Dead City, Daryl Dixon, the final seasons of the original show. They're all reaching for the texture of something the best era had. The feeling people describe when they say those early seasons were different. The thing they can't quite name. It was always the question. It was always Hershel in the morning light, still winding the watch, still keeping time by values in a world that had stopped valuing the values. The watch is somewhere in the franchise still, carried by someone who understands what it means without needing to say so. turned over in a quiet moment in the space between crises, while the world outside keeps deciding, and the person holding the watch keeps refusing to let the world decide for them. What if the best era isn't behind us? What if it's wherever someone finally finds the courage to ask the question again? And sit inside it long enough to let it hurt. To stay with the unanswerable rather than moving past it toward the next thing the story needs. I don't know if that's coming. The archive doesn't give me certainty about the future of a franchise still being made. What it gives me is the pattern, the question, the watch turning over in someone's hands, the watch face somewhere still marking time, the question still unanswered, still costing whoever carries it something real, still may be worth everything it costs to keep asking.